We're up. We're on. Well, see, who knows? This program in my living room is so much fun because we do it with one person helping. In the old Ingram show, we used to have 17, 18 volunteers. It was somebody for sound and somebody for whatever. But one of the favorite shows I ever did on Ingram, and we did over almost 1,000, was on November 10th, 2000. And my guest was a fellow named Bill Vander Zalm, who had once been the Premier of BC and is known as the Lilac King. And, well, he's just an interesting character. And Bill's written a new book called For the People. It's a great read, and everybody I've talked to that's read it has a different opinion. We're going to talk about that in a second. But Mr. Vander Zalm, welcome to the new Ingram, or the old Ingram, whatever one you want to say, since we're in my living room.
Well, since it was 2000 when we last did this, I guess I can say the old Ingram.
Yeah, it was November 10th, 2000,
ago.
day before Remembrance Day. And you absolutely wowed our audience, I remember, because for months afterwards, I had people, mostly of the NDP persuasion, who come up and say, you know, that Bill's a really nice guy, isn't he?
Yeah.
We took that thing and you just came out.
Finally discovered that.
You
Took a long time.
You were a people's person on that program. We talked about your growing up in Holland,
and that's what the book is all about, for a good part at least.
It is.
It's varied. It's an autobiography. It's, I think, an educational book. It's certainly historical.
Oh.
It documents everything that happened during all of those years. It's, I think, somewhat inspirational, hopefully. And it's philosophical. Now, what else can I say about the book? It's a good deal. It's 745 pages, and for slow readers, there's a lot of pictures. So
there's
it's
lots
a bit
of
both.
pictures. I got to say that I love the book, but it was one of the slowest reads I've ever done in my life, because it required, most of the time when you read a book, you don't really know the story or something, right? You read the book and you accept the book as the way it's written. But what I found about this book, and talking to people like our mutual friend Gary Bannerman and so on, is that everybody that's read the book wants to add another 20 pages.
That's interesting. I'm game, providing they write the 20 pages. I'll put them in and start a new book.
Well, you know, you'd have a 6,000 page book, because everybody has just something they want to add to the story.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I could have written several books. There's a whole lot that I could have said that isn't necessarily in the book. But, you know, there's a limit as to how far you can go, and maybe I could write a second book after this one gets a bit stale.
Well, Michael Smith seemed to love the book in the province.
Surprised me a little bit, because I don't say such nice things about the media.
I know, but Michael loved the book. You could tell from
I appreciate that.
From what he wrote.
That's very good.
And I haven't talked to or seen or read or heard anything about the book that isn't positive in some sometimes grudging way. Now, you know, I've got the old David Hancock House Publishers Bill the Gardener book.
Yeah.
Because you're a gardener. But you're a businessman. You operate all over the world, don't you?
Not so much anymore. I find the world is a troubling place. And even having wandered away as far as Oregon, where I have a nursery, it presents a bit of a problem. I have to travel down. Nurseries are a hands-on type of business. But it was fun some years ago. It's not so much fun anymore. And I was involved in some real estate dealings in California. It looked great a couple of years ago. It looked fantastic. But suddenly, in the last year particularly, it's gone a bit sour. So the world is a troubling place. There's lots of trouble. But I guess I foretold that a little bit in my book when I wrote it already so many years ago. I started back in 1992 writing the book. The trouble was that I kept writing, putting it aside. It was all longhand, because I find when you have a pen in hand, it connects better with the brain, and you remember things that you might not if you were sitting at the computer going at a great speed. So therefore, it was written pen in hand, longhand, many pages, started in 1992. The trouble was I kept putting it aside. I'd get bored a little bit, put it aside. Then when you get busy, you go back 6 months later, you end up having to start all over again.
Yeah, and you
You've
forget
thought
what
of things,
yeah.
you've changed your mind about some things, and you've perhaps forgotten a bit about what you put there already. So it was a big job and a labor of love.
So you literally spent 16 years writing it.
Well, not really. Actually, I spent a great deal of time
you spent
early
your whole
on.
life writing.
I put it aside for a good while, and then about a couple of years ago, I said to Lillian, we're going down to Palm Springs, and I'm going to sit on the patio in the sunshine, and all you do is bring me a coffee in the morning, a tea in the afternoon, and a good stiff drink at night, and I'm fine. I keep writing, which I did. I wrote for hours, days.
700
and that's how I got
some,
it done.
40 some odd
Yeah,
pages.
it was fun.
Okay. Tell me about Bill Vander Zalm, the kid. Because you were living in Holland when the war broke out. Your father was not there. And I just want to get this down on tape again, because I'm not sure if we've got the original tape that we did from that November 10th, 2000. Some of our tapes have been, seem to have been destroyed. My favorite one I did with Gordon Campbell on March 8th, 2001 has disappeared. But anyway, that was dealing with Indian land claims. We're going to bring that up too. But you were, how old were you when the war broke out?
When the war broke out, I was about 6 years old.
So 12
And
at the
there
end of
was
the war.
there was 8 of us, 8 children. Mother had to look after 8 children because father had been stranded in Canada.
Of all places.
The war broke out. He was in Vancouver. He tried to get back. In those days, of course, you had to take a train from Vancouver to Montreal, and it was like a week's travel. When he got to Montreal, there were a whole lot of other Dutch people waiting to get on the boat, but already there were torpedoes in the Atlantic, so the boats weren't leaving. So he couldn't get back, and in fact, he couldn't communicate. So we didn't hear all of those years during the war.
So for 5 years, he didn't know what was happening with you, and you didn't know what was happening with Dad.
That's correct, exactly. And I start the book by talking about a very memorable event for a small boy. It was, I guess, 1940, May 1940, when the war broke out for the Dutch. Already there was war in Poland, Czechoslovakia, other places. But it was May 5th, 1945, when, 1940, when Holland was invaded. The war didn't last long. The German army rolled across very quickly. But I remember us moving to the front room windows to see what the drone, the drum, the noise outside, and it was little planes going over by the hundreds, on their way to Rotterdam to bomb the city of Rotterdam. And they bombed most of it pretty flat. And I can remember kneeling by the window, all of us sitting, or kneeling by the window looking out and seeing these planes going over. That was a memorable day.
Can we take a break for a second? Well, before I went into my coughing spell, and I apologize, we were talking, Bill was just saying the hundreds of planes flying over, bombing Rotterdam, and you were kneeling.
Kneeling by the window looking out.
Yeah.
And seeing all this happen. The war didn't last long. I also remember we lived fairly close to the dunes between the North Sea and us. It was only a kilometer or so, a couple of kilometers. And I can remember the German army setting the dunes on fire to smoke out all the Dutch soldiers that had been driven to the dunes. And I can remember that. As a matter of fact, I say in the book that there are times when I can smell the smoke. But I guess that's a bit of an exaggeration, but what I'm really saying is that if I smell a pine burning or burning pine,
it brings back a memory.
It brings back memories. And I can remember as kids, we played war games in the fields behind the house. That was the thing that I guess we associated best with the time in our lives.
Well, one of the ladies that saw the show we did before thought it was wonderful because you said there were something like, what, 12 recipes or something for cooking tulip bulbs?